Unfortunately, the Quran is straightforwardly and unambiguously mistaken in this. The evidence is overwhelming for Jesus' crucifixion. And that's why SHABIR deserts the Quran and instead affirms that, in fact, Jesus was crucified, but he wasn't killed. And as a result, what SHABIR winds up with is a view that is neither Islam nor Christianity, but a kind of mishmash of the truth, what we might call Chrislam, a sort of mishmash of Christianity and Islam. Namely, Jesus was crucified, but he didn't die. But what I want to know is, if you've already deserted Islam by denying that the Quran is correct in saying that Jesus was not crucified, why not be consistent and go all the way and say that, yes, he was crucified and he was killed and then raised from the dead? And I do think that this is the view SHABIR should adopt, because his own view has real problems, I think, both historically and theologically. Let me mention some historical objections to his view. First, mere visionary appearances cannot explain the origin of the disciples' belief in Jesus' resurrection. The German scholar Hans Kessler points out that the idea of an isolated resurrection before the general resurrection at the end of the world goes against all prior Jewish modes of thought. So if the disciples saw visions of Jesus, as SHABIR admits that they did, they wouldn't have concluded he was risen from the dead. As James D.G. Dunn, whom SHABIR quoted in his opening speech, says, it remains an indisputable fact that the earliest believers were absolutely convinced that they had seen Jesus risen from the dead. And yet, why did they conclude that it was Jesus risen from the dead? Why not simply a vision of the dead man? Why draw the astonishing conclusion that the resurrection had already taken place in the case of a single individual, separate from and prior to the general resurrection? There isn't any good answer to that question on SHABIR's view. Mere visions of Jesus after his death would not lead to belief in his resurrection. Second problem is that the New Testament consistently draws a distinction between a resurrection appearance of Jesus and mere visions of Jesus. The appearances were confined to a short period of time following the crucifixion, but visions of the exalted Christ went on in the early church. Even Gerhard Ludemann admits that most scholars recognize this distinction. And what that means is you can't explain the resurrection appearances as mere visions, as SHABIR wants to do. Third problem historically is that it's highly improbable that Jesus was still alive when he was taken down from the cross. The Romans were professional executioners. They were good at killing people. If Jesus had still been alive, they would have broken his legs so as to ensure his death on the cross. And in any case, the spear thrust into Jesus' side by one of the soldiers is an attested method of ensuring death by crucifixion that is found in Roman sources outside the New Testament. So in short, SHABIR's hypothesis lacks, I think, explanatory scope, explanatory power, and plausibility. But not only are there historical objections, there are theological objections to this view. Two of them I want to mention. Number one, it comes too little, too late. For Jesus has already been exposed to humiliation, suffering, and shame by his crucifixion. He's already been shown to be under a curse, according to Mosaic law, by being crucified. The Jews thought at least that they had killed him. The Quran says, it records the boast of the Jews. We have put to death the Messiah, Jesus, the son of Mary. And you can almost hear them saying, ha, ha, ha. They were boasting that they had killed Jesus. As long as they thought they had done this, there's no point in bringing him back to life or raising him to heaven from inside the tomb once he's already been humiliated, suffered, and crucified. It comes too little, too late. Secondly, SHABIR's hypothesis turns God into a deceiver who fooled the disciples into believing that Christ was risen from the dead, thereby causing Christianity to come into being. On SHABIR's view, it is Allah himself who is responsible for foisting the false religion of Christianity upon the world. According to the hadith of Sahih Muslim, on the day of resurrection, Christians will be summoned by God and thrown into the fires of hell because they worship Jesus as the Son of God. And yet, according to Shabir's view, it is God himself who is responsible for this blasphemy by tricking the disciples into thinking Jesus was risen from the dead and thereby foisting the Christian religion upon the world. So Shabir's view is not only, I think, historically implausible, but it's also, I think, theologically hopeless as well. I think that his view is vastly inferior to the resurrection hypothesis, which was, after all, the hypothesis that the original disciples gave to explain their experience of Jesus after his death.